The government facing that crucial test in the Dáil today, which will debate a motion of confidence in the government later. The coalition has tabled the motion on its own future following a no confidence vote filed by Sinn Féin, which comes after almost a week of fuel protests and growing anger over the cost of living. Well, the ministers point to a €505 million support package as proof they're responding. Opposition parties argue it's too little, too late. Now, earlier I spoke about this with the Shannon Sinn Féin TD, Donna McGettigan, and I began by asking her what her core message her party wants to send to the government and the public with the motion.
Really what happened, if we go back to the start, that Fianna, Fáil and Fine Gael refused to listen to the people, so people felt compelled to go out and protest, but then they came out with more half measures, and we felt that workers and families deserved better, so we put forward a motion of no confidence and have asked for it to be taken in our Dáil time today.
You say half measures, and there can be legitimate arguments over the timing of it. Protesters would say it took the protests to get the extra additional 505 million support package out of the government, although the government may well say that might have been on the way when they were talking about reviewing it again at the end of May. But over the past number of weeks, they have given out over €750 million in support, and I'm sure they would say that's a not insignificant sum. No,
but it's not, but it's still not enough for what people are looking for, and that's why people had to go out and protest. We didn't want to see protests, and I don't think anybody did, but they just felt they had no choice. When you look at, say, what they're taking in fuel, they're taking a significant amount of tax on fuel, and Ireland charges almost double the EU minimum fuel tax rate. So there is room there for them to do more what they did at the pump. And what we need to see at the pumps is the maximum reduction in fuel prices at the pump. But when I've been talking to people out there in the protests, when they heard how much taxes they're actually paying on fuel, it really, really angered them. And then the public got behind the protesters. We just feel that government still aren't listening.
The protests themselves, I mean, your party had said it stood with the people protesting, but even the government stressing, and Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, stressing that, legitimate protest is fine by them, but that he felt elements of it went beyond the pale. The blockades of fuel depots and roads. Would you agree with that was taking it too far, even if all of it ultimately resulted in this additional support package?
I think that we stood with them, and we would continue to still stand with them, and I think the people are behind them, so that's what you need to look at. I think, as far as I know, there was fuel coming out of the depots, not much, but there still was fuel coming out. One of the things that the protesters
it was difficult for product to be coming out of the country's only refinery in Whitegate.
It was difficult, but the thing is, what we have to look at here is why they had to stand there. This is because the government could have sorted this out, and they didn't. They had to stand there and they had to make a stand, and people were behind them. That's what needs to be looked at here.
The government said that these blockades endangered essential services. I mean, where do you think the line should be drawn between legitimate protest and actions that disrupt the country?
Okay, so when I was at the protest, I could see ambulances were being allowed in, and if you want to take one instance, you could take my brother and my sister-in-law had to go into maternity. She was in labour. She had to get out of the car and walk to the maternity hospital. They had a healthy baby boy. But even they came out afterwards and said that to them that was just a small inconvenience. Everything was okay, and they were still supporting the protesters. So people, as I say, people were behind them. People, like they were, if you had went up to the line where the protest was and said, look, I have an emergency, they were letting people through. People were getting through if they needed to get through.
But for every story of someone who got through, equally there were stories of people who had great difficulty getting through or who didn't get through. On Morning Focus, we heard from people who missed appointments, be it work or a hospital. We heard from a gentleman who took 5 hours to get to a funeral in Cork, someone else who was put to the pin of the collar visiting a loved one who was passing away, causing, even if people did ultimately get through in some of those scenarios, it caused a lot of heartache and stress and worry, and there were others who didn't get to where they needed to go.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that is the nature of protest, and that is very unfortunate that is happening, but that is the nature of protest. And
it may be the nature, but Donna, maybe the nature of protest, but that won't wash with the people in those scenarios.
No, and it is unfortunate that happens. And as I say, we didn't want to see the protests happening either. We would rather that it was sorted out. When we called for the PMB before Easter, and then we called for the Dáil to be reconvened before the protest started. That's the route we wanted to take. We wanted this to be sorted out in Dáil, properly debated and legislation passed. Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
The package itself, the additional package of €505 million, your party has called these half measures. Clearly, you believe this package won't make fuel affordable for ordinary families and businesses?
No, 10 cents is already going to be swallowed up again. And then there's no mention of home heating oil. And that's one thing that people on the line were telling us, home heating oil. And this is the reason why a lot of people come out and supported the protest, because it's hitting everybody. You have people that can't afford to heat their homes. You've even seen where one company has said that he's just closing down his the agri side of his contracting service because he just doesn't have any. He's just disillusioned with the government and this package. And then we have reports of a bus company in Limerick now that's saying it's not viable for them just to continue to provide support for the school transport. And we've seen the rises in the school transport costs as it is. So all these things, they're not going to feed back into workers and families. It's not going to solve any issues happening here on the ground.
This goes beyond fuel, though, doesn't it? This really reflects a wider cost of living crisis. I mean, what steps would Sinn Féin take differently faced with what is a very difficult situation? And even aside from the cost of living crisis, the government would argue this is a global crisis driven by conflict, and in terms of cuts they can make, they're bound by EU measures in some instances.
Well, we need to see the maximum reduction for everyone directly at the pumps. And that's as a starting point. We need to see immediate 25 cent off the price of diesel and petrol. They're given 10 cents at the minute. But we want to see the complete removal of excise, including the carbon component in home heating oil. The home heating oil is one thing that wasn't mentioned here. We have stood in the Dáil and we have fought for cost of living package for those on disabilities. They're also going to be directly hit by this as well. And we even see in 320,000 homes in electricity arrears, it's the cost of living has started this off, and it's just escalated into this, and nothing has been done about the cost of living. We were told we were using dangerous words when we were saying that people had to choose heat or eat in their homes. That's the actual reality on the ground, and that's where we're seeing the government are not listening to people on the ground. This
motion, Donna, though, ultimately, it's not going to succeed, is it? I mean, there are some independent TDs who've yet to declare how they'll vote, and Danny Healy-Rae has called for Simon Harris and Micheál Martin to be removed. Even if he and others were not to side with the government on this, they still have the numbers in their favour. So is this ultimately, it's not going to succeed? So is it not just performative?
No, we have been inundated, and I mean inundated with emails that we can't even have the time to answer half of them on this motion, calling for us to call for this. But even before we called for it, people were asking us to call for the no confidence motion, and people were ringing us, people were coming into the office. People are just so sick and tired that they want this, and they want, and I think the pressure is going to be on those independent TDs. Are they going to stand with the people, or are they going to stand with the government? And that's the kind of pressure that's been put on them. I don't think this is performative, and I think going by what we're hearing in our messages, in our emails, no, I think this is the right decision.
Oh, well, if as expected the government prevails, where do Sinn Féin and the opposition go from here?
I think you're seeing the combined opposition once again singing from the one hymn sheet here, and I think that makes us very strong. We need to keep continuing to pressure the government to stand with the people, to put forward measures that actually help the people. And that's really what we're going to have to keep doing. We
do have to leave it there. Donna McGettigan, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Alan.
Would love to hear from you on this. It's 0818 400 964 if you want to give us a call, or send us a message, 086 1800 964 via text or WhatsApp. I'm now joined on the line now by the Tulla-based Fianna Fáil Minister of State, Timmy Dooley. Timmy, good morning to you.
Morning, Adam.
You heard Donna McGettigan outlining why Sinn Féin has filed that no confidence motion, which has led to the coalition tabling the motion on its own future. What's your view on it?
Well, look, I know Donna very well, and I know she works very hard, and she listens to the constituents the same as I do. But we also have a responsibility here to address an evolving and a developing crisis. The war in Iran has had a massive impact on, first of all, the security of supply of fuel, but also on the cost of it. So the government introduced a number of measures over 3 weeks ago now, at a cost to the taxpayer of 250 million. And that, unfortunately, wasn't enough, because over the following days, the price of oil continued to rise, and the benefits that were attached to that were wiped out. We have engaged with the representative.
Sorry, Timmy,
bodies.
wasn't that inevitable though? Is there a kind of I suppose an acceptance within the party that perhaps rather than a separate 250 million and 505 million, that maybe it should have been combined as one to have maybe more impact?
But hold on a second. There's nothing inevitable about this war and the price of oil. It fluctuates every day. Now, so we set aside 250 million initially, and in the following days the price continued to rise. There were a couple of ups and downs, but ultimately it rose, and it wiped out the support that was in place. So we started again to engage with representative bodies to see how best we could put some more money into it. And on Sunday evening, we announced another package of an additional 505 million. So that was very significant. Now, look, I don't want to play politics with this, and it's not Donna because she's following the lead from her party at headquarters. But the headquarters of Sinn Féin on Sunday morning put down the motion of no confidence before they even saw the package of measures that were coming out in the afternoon or evening. So that's there's a little bit of politics in that, but I understand how opposition politics work. I've sat on the other side of the house for long enough, so I know how that.
Maybe they were just responding to the level of anger that was out there. Maybe they suspected that the government hadn't done enough with the 250 million euro measures, and that whatever was coming hot on the heels of that wasn't going to be sufficient either.
Yes, but the government also has a responsibility, because there's, and in some of Donna's language, that you can just strip away the taxes or the charges that are on fuel, but that's all factored into the budget. So if you reduce the tax take in any walk of life or in any area, you have one of two things to do. You either raise taxes from some other section or you cut services. Now, it'll be interesting to hear today if Sinn Féin put forward a suite of cuts to services, whether it's to children with disabilities, or whether it's cutting back on special needs assistance, or it's going to reduce the pupil-teacher ratio, or it's going to raise taxes on other elements of society that are already hard-pressed. So, like, a budget's a very tricky equation to put together. There's money in on the one hand, and there's money out on the other, and it tries to balance. Now, what we have tried to do in this instance is, in the hope that the continued surplus that we've had is there at the end of the year, so we'll be able to allocate that 750 million from the surplus. But at a time of massive economic upheaval across the globe as a result of the war in Iran, there's no guarantee that we'll get the big surpluses that we've been getting from the multinationals. And we've been dependent on a small number that have been working really hard and delivering for us. And it's also noted that those are the companies who employ an awful lot of people in Ireland who were deeply impacted and potentially hugely impacted by the blockades on our ports, because oil couldn't get out. That was going to have an impact on people getting to work. And you've identified many of the people that called you who had difficulty getting to hospitals. And that wasn't as a result of the protests in Clare. In fairness, they did ensure that people with special requirements were let through, ambulances were let through. That's fine. But the blockade of the ports in Galway, Limerick and Cork were making it impossible to get fuel for ambulances and for staff coming to work. And I know a bit about this.
Timmy, I did put the point about blocking Whitegate and so on to Donna. But yesterday with your party colleague Carl Crowe and with Joe Cooney, I mentioned the Ireland Thinks poll that was in the Sunday Independent, which showed majority support for the actions of the protesters, 56%. Did the government underestimate the level of support that was out there, leaving aside the rights and wrongs about how they went about it and the blockading of, as you just mentioned, fuel depots and so on? Did the government underestimate the level of support that was out there? And by saying we're keeping it under review, did you underestimate how quickly the crisis would escalate?
I don't think so, but I think there's a small bit of disconnect in thinking, in that I fully understand the level. In fact, I thought there would be a higher level of support in that poll for the protest, i.e. for people who are concerned about the rising costs of fuel and the impact that that's having on their weekly budgets and making life more difficult for them with increased cost of living. Look, we've had a very significant increase in costs since COVID and since the war in Ukraine, and it has continued. And I don't think wages have caught up with that. The extra pressure now from fuel was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. But there's no magic wand at government level, as I have explained. So the average response, of course, is we need to get the fuel price down. Government is caught in a really tricky position in ensuring that it has monies in the event of job losses. We're at something like 4% unemployment, or a little bit less at the minute, which is really full employment when you think about it, because there's a lot of people kind of between jobs, etc. But if this international uncertainty continues, so much of the work that we do in Ireland, so many of the people who are well employed in Ireland are based on exports to other countries. Even in our food production, almost 90% of our dairy products and our beef products are exported. All the big multinationals that are here on the pharma side, on the tech side, they export into Europe and wider afield. If the international shocks continue, that aspect of the economy could be impacted. And what we can't do as a government is put ourselves into a position where we have borrowed beyond what we're able to pay back. And we certainly don't want to get back to where we were 15 or 16 years ago, where we didn't have a buffer to manage difficult situations. So,
but even Timmy, even accepting that, we've heard dissatisfaction from people in relation to this latest support package, the 2.4 cent reduction in green diesel. Colin Donoghue, who's involved with the protests in Clare, displeased with that. There are people not happy that that's just a 10 cent cut on excise duty on petrol and diesel, and they feel that this package won't actually make fuel affordable for ordinary families and businesses.
Well, let's address that. So over the course of the first package and the second package, based on the continued increase in oil, road diesel is down by 32. The tax take on road diesel is down by 32%. The tax take on petrol is down by 27%. But because there was such a low tax on green diesel in the first instance, it's only down by 7.2%. So what we have done in the work that we've been doing over the weekend and announced on Sunday is to put in place now a scheme to support those using green diesel. Now, Cathal O'Donoghue, whom I know and whom I spoke to during the course of this, there is a programme in place to assist his business because they're involved in buses and coaches. There's a programme to support the hauliers who have very significant usage of oil with a rebate scheme and an additional support based on the number of trucks that they have. There's a programme to support those users of green diesel.
Timmy, I accept all that, and I put that to him, but still, it suggested it wasn't going to be enough. Even within your own party, has this whole situation led to dissatisfaction and anger? The parliamentary party meeting yesterday, it sounded like reportedly very strong views expressed dissatisfaction with the Taoiseach's handling of it, with Jim O'Callaghan's handling of the Defence Forces. Is this going to lead to longer term implications for your own party?
I think there's always issues when you're in a crisis, and there's an effort to sort of look at communication. Can we communicate better? And by me being on the radio this morning, I'm trying to communicate what's in that package. And for sure, it's not going to be enough. The price of oil from the time this war started has gone up dramatically. It's increased out of all measures. But the government cannot, in every instance, find a response that solves every aspect of the fallout from a war that we didn't create, and we're not in control of the supply or control of oil. Some have suggested that you put a cap on the price of oil. Now that sounds great in theory, but the practice behind that is that taxpayers' funds then have to be given to the oil companies, who can continue to raise the price every day. And it would break the country overnight if we were to engage in that. So it's about trying to bring forward measures that help insofar as they can without putting the country into a financial shock that would see a lot more people lose their jobs and damage our republic.
Has this crisis exposed deeper instability, not just within your own party, but within the coalition? And as I put it to Donna, I mean, the coalition is going to succeed in this confidence motion, but is there damage in terms of the relationship with the public? Can you rebuild public trust?
Well, you see, because the public, as I see it, are in such a state of shock at the increase in costs at the minute, Their central concern is to see that stabilised insofar as it can. But I think as time goes on, people will rightly reflect and say, well, how do you do that? Where do you get the money to reduce the costs of fuel, and just generally, what services do you cut or what taxes do you raise elsewhere? And I think what's not clear at the minute is the opposition is there in terms of the people who've been on the street, the protesters. That's one thing. But I haven't seen any of the political parties, and maybe Sinn Féin will come forward today with a suite of measures that explains all of this as to how they can effectively take tax, wipe out tax on fuel or reduce it dramatically that will meet the needs that we'd all like to have, and how they're still going to run a country, how you're going to be able to employ the doctors, the nurses, the guards, the teachers, how you're going to be able to provide all the services that are such an integral part of our society, and how you're going to do that in a way that balances the budget. Now, if somebody's able to come forward with that winning with that winning solution, they'll win election after election after election. But look, I'm around a fair length of time, and I don't see how or where that magic wand comes out of.
Okay, we do
to solve this problem.
Okay, look, we do have to leave it there. Timmy, thanks to you for joining us this morning. That's the Tulla-based Fianna Fáil Minister of State, Timmy Dooley.